All right, we should be good to go.
All right. Well, thanks again, Tim and the Minnesota 365 user group. I appreciate always participating in events like these. So when we take a look today, this morning, we're going to start out strong and take a look at managing Microsoft Teams for us. So there's quite a few items that we're going to go through here, a little bit in the admin center, a little bit of PowerShell. Just to make a quick mention, all of the PowerShell that is available, if I reference it, it's on hidden slides here. So when we upload the decks afterwards, you'll be able to access them as well. The first item here, again, just to reiterate what Tim mentioned, please feel free to drive awareness of the event. I know that as we take a look, sometimes the best advertising is from the community and from some of your peers. So please take a moment to just send out a quick social media post about the event today. And then again, our sponsors are incredibly important. Without our sponsors, certainly trouble having events like these. So let's go ahead. Let's talk briefly about myself. So my name is Pat Peterson. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I work for an organization called RSM. RSM is a consulting organization, and I'm on the modern worker, the productivity team. So I focus a daily basis on Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, as well as Planner and anything else that users can do with Office 365 and Microsoft 365. So let's get on to the good stuff here. So as we take a look for ourselves, the items that we're going to touch on and cover today are some basic governance items. So we'll take a look at naming policies inside of Microsoft Teams and specifically groups. So when we think about this, we think about Microsoft Teams really being an important tool that a lot of organizations have adopted very rapidly. Now we're at the point, at least what I'm seeing is we're at the point where organizations have adopted Office 365 and Teams in general in the last few months, but there was no planning done. There is a meme that was going around, at least Twitter is where I saw it. It said, "Who drove your digital transformation?" Answer A was the CIO, B was the CEO, or C then was COVID-19. And I think we can all appreciate that working in a remote world, working, not able to be in the same room has certainly driven the adoption of Microsoft Teams. And there's obviously a piece of it where you may not have had everything buttoned up successfully before you deployed it or before you let your users take a look at it. So today we're going to cover some of those basic governance topics, such as naming policies, blocking certain words, 4-letter words or specifically swear words. Also taking a look at usage and group expiration. And then one of the pieces that I'm most excited for is the Teams templates, which has rolled out relatively new for it. So you're aware of what that looks like. We'll also jump into the policy side of it. I won't granularly go through every single policy that's out there, but just more or less what happens from an organization or organizer versus a per user setup there. And we will do that in the admin center as well as a slide or two there. With time, then, we'll take a look at some of the usage analytics that are available to us so we can keep track of those pieces of it. My session this afternoon on adoption does go a little bit more in depth into the usage analytics and the Power BI dashboard that's available there for us as well. And then the last piece that we're going to interject or kind of bring some of those items together is the voice component. So when we think about the voice side of it, I always like to say there's two components to it. One is audio conferencing, although it's not a traditional physical phone that's on someone's desk or a dedicated phone number that's there. Oftentimes, that does get looped in or included a little bit in with it. And so we'll talk briefly about audio conferencing and then a little bit about the configuration overview itself. There are some other sessions obviously devoted to Microsoft Teams Voice. And so I'd certainly encourage you to take a look at those as well if that interests you. So let's keep going on down here for us. So when we take a look at the idea of using Microsoft Teams, I always want to make a quick mention that Microsoft Teams, as you probably all are aware, it's the hub. It's everything that's connected together. So this includes Microsoft Office products that you see on the left-hand side with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Stream, and so on and so forth. It also includes, the ability to have calling, whether it's client to client or teams to teams, or the ability to have phone number possibly there too. We also have the chat functionality, and then we have that teamwork area. If you take a look at rolling out Microsoft Teams and adopting it from a user side of it, chat is generally the easiest piece to roll out. Then we have meetings, pretty easy to roll out as well, especially if you don't have another tool out there. And then you have that teamwork piece, and that teamwork piece can be a little bit more confusing and piece to roll that out, but certainly you have that ability here to bring it in. And then the other item on the right-hand side there is those third-party applications. You know, what I'm seeing out there is the ability to bring Zoom in and have a dashboard of your Zoom meetings, or Rike or Smartsheets from a task management, or Trello as an example. So really powerful way to bring in some of those third-party applications as well, but really as favorites are out there. We're not going to dive deep into each of these here specifically, but just want to make sure, you know, we're all level setting and have some of that information set up for us. This is one, I think I borrowed this from another deck. In fact, I don't know where I got it from, but certainly it's a Microsoft slide. When we take a look here, you know, one of the items to make mention is that Microsoft Teams does use more than one service, okay? So we have the Microsoft Teams service. We have Skype for Business still underneath the hood. And if any of you have tried to deploy Microsoft Teams Voice, you're well aware of that. One of these days, hopefully we can just use Teams modules and not have to utilize Skype. And then we also have the Azure and Office 365 side of it. So when we think about some of those, the reason why this becomes important is when you're looking at guest access or sharing files from that. Although Teams has that setting, you also need to ensure that SharePoint is set up successfully for that as well. So just something to make mention of if you're trying to describe Microsoft Teams to someone, you know, this might be a good diagram here to start with, that it uses a bunch of different workloads. It's a bunch of different microservices that are combined together. Other items here, you know, when we think about file structure that's available for us, just as a quick mention, you know, on the left-hand side of that little diagram on the right-hand side of your screen, I should say, underneath the Teams logo, you know, really the structure of the channels versus the SharePoint structure itself. So the reason why I like this one here is it's just more or less that file structure that's inside of Teams and how it relates to SharePoint and how it relates to OneDrive for it as well. So just mention there for you to keep track of. All right, let's get into the basic governance pieces of it. So when we take a look at the governance items, you know, I think it's important for us to understand is that a lot of the settings that we're going to take a look at will be applied, you know, at the group level. And with that being said, every team is part of an Office 365 group, and any setting out there will impact that group out there. So when we think about this here, we really have to sit back and say, what settings do we want to enable that would apply to Office 365 groups in general? But then also thinking about it, what are we licensed for? I am not a licensing specialist, so check with your licensing specialist, but some of these features do require the Azure AD Premium licensing that you may or may not be subscribed to based upon your existing Office 365 licensing. So let's dive into some of these. The first one here to make a mention of is the idea of naming policies. Naming policies have been available for quite some time. And when we think about the naming policies here, what it really does is it has some key benefits. The consistency, identify the purpose of the specific group. In other words, what is it used for? I was once working, actually last week, I was working with a client and they had their SharePoint site, a team, somebody created a group, and they were all called the same thing. And they didn't know what the purposes were. So naming policies can really help out with that. And then the other pieces of it can depend upon information on the user. So it can be dynamic as well, based upon the user profile, what country they're from, the specific departments. A lot of different elements here can really come from that side of it. So an example here for us is if we have the word team in front of it, with the word department, for instance, and then the team name that's being created, and then the office location, being the US here as an example. So for instance, you could manually create all your teams as Team Marketing Project Oakdale US. Maybe you put some hyphens or some icons in there as well. But really, when you think about it, having a consistent naming convention is a really powerful way for users to understand what that group does, what that group's purpose is for it. This is an example. It certainly is not going to work in all organizations, but an organization or an industry rather that I work with on a regular basis is the construction industry. And a lot of times with the construction industry, they want to use Teams from a project management perspective because it's available easily on a mobile device. It's also available, on the desktop, and that experience is the same. You can add in, guests very easily and quickly there. So what they've gone ahead and decided to do is they put the word project. Whenever it's a project item, they put the word project at the beginning of it. The reason for it is then users can quickly identify whether it's a department team or a functional team, or it's a specifically related to project out there. Keep in mind from that, we do also have the ability to utilize templates, which we'll talk about here as well. And then you can utilize, provisioning processes as well. Flow's got the ability to create a team out of the box now. Not clone, but create. Hopefully one of these days you don't have to use an Azure run or a graph call to make that happen. So some of the naming policies are done, relatively simple. We have the ability to set prefixes. We can enter in the group name from the user. We can also append the suffix at the end of it here for us. So we're going to take a look at those in just a moment inside of the Azure portal. One thing to make mention, naming policies do not apply to everyone. If you are using a global admin account, or if you are a partner or CSP and you are coming in and supporting, if you are an admin at all, you will not have to apply the naming policies. And in fact, it won't work that way. So just something to make mention about when you take a look at some of these settings here. The global admin role specifically does overwrite or does not apply in this case. You'll see this slide a few times here as we go through some of these policies. So let's take a look at the configuration here for us. I'm going to jump in there for us. Let me just bring over the screen. All right. So the first thing to take a look at from it is inside of Azure. I'm going to zoom in here for us. I heard everyone loud and clear that in Doug's session, it was hard to see some of the items. So I'll make sure that I zoom in here for us. But for us to take a look at is we have the ability for group naming policy. So where I'm at inside of Azure itself specifically is off of the groups and then naming policy on the settings on the left-hand side. Tony, it would require, I see your question in terms of naming policies specifically. I believe it would require an Azure AD Premium, either P1 or P2 license included. At least that's from my memory, but I could be mistaken or wrong. So we want to double check that itself. So here, when we take a look at that naming policy for us to be able to see, this is just an example for you to be able to take a look at and see. I created a quick, policy that appends or adds the prefix of the word team in front of it. Now, in this environment, I'm only a global admin, which means I can't test it, right? Because that was something that's not available here for me, but really easy to do in the browser aspect of it. Yes, there is PowerShell way to do it. However, in this case, I find it really easy to do it inside of the GUI interface here for it. But as we take a look at that naming policy here, we also have the ability to add in other items. So I can add in, specific attributes, whether it's the user's department, the company, office, the title out there as well. So keep in mind that you can either use the string concept or you can utilize an attribute piece of it. Now, depending upon how you want to provision teams and what you want those to look like, the group or the current policy or the group naming policy may not be, a specific element that you want to do. I work with a lot of clients on what that provisioning process looks like. And oftentimes you want to have it be a little more dynamic than a one size fits all. And so that's where you'd go ahead and utilize, a provisioning process instead, and specify what department or whatever the case may be. But this is a really good way to keep things consistent and have those names available, specifically when you're taking a look at the group side of it, really understand what that team's purpose is or who the owner is as well. So let's continue on down the path here. So when we take a look for us, again, some of the different attributes that are supported, department, company, office, we saw that already with our drop-down portion. The next component that's out there is the ability here for blocked words. So for instance, when you take a look at blocked words, this is a true story. I saw a client that had the group human resources, HR. They had a half dozen of different teams that all had a variance of human resources in their name. Keep in mind when that group is created, it also generates an email address. So what was happening is people were emailing the wrong human resources group that's there. So in this case of it, certainly want to make sure that you have blocked words set up, or specifically a policy set up against certain words itself. So here, when you take a look at it, blocked words can be a department name. Maybe you upload custom department names in there as well. So something to take a look at there as well. Thanks, Tony, for putting that in the link there. But before you start configuring that itself, I do want to make a quick mention that Microsoft does provide some common options for inappropriate words. We also want to make sure we focus in on the business or privacy related words, and substring searches, are not carried out. So for instance, class isn't blocked even if it has the word ass in it, as an example. So here, when you take a look at it, I think it's important to understand that although you can configure this, is this really a problem or an issue for you for those specific team name or blocked words? Maybe not on the inappropriate words, but maybe more on the business or privacy, related words out there. For instance, maybe there's a rename or a specific project or secretive, a project that's out there, and you want to make sure that there's not a team created with that name out there. I've seen it where there's been a rebrand of a organization or a name change. And what ended up happening is someone on the project team created a team as public underneath the new name. And guess what? The entire organization quickly knew what the new name was going to be because it was a public team, right? They were able to discover that and find that information. So that may be an instance where you'd want to focus and block some of those words themselves. So where that's located here, again, does not apply to everyone for us. Where that's located, again, if we bring in that slide again, same area where you're at from a group naming side of it, you just have the ability here for blocked words. And when we think about the blocked word side of it, you can download some blocked words and specifically add to it and then upload that CSV for. So a very simple way to do it. If you're someone that has time and you're an admin side of it, it may not be a bad idea to just put this in place if you have this, available to you as a future reference. And there's some PowerShell piece. All right, we've already taken a look at the group naming settings for us. All right, the next one, group creation. This is one that if teams just started happening on your watch, this is one that you may want to turn down. And the reason for it is if you let users create a team, they will literally create a team for everything, and they will not use any of the teams that are created. Before focusing specifically on Microsoft Teams and the adoption of the Office 365 stack, I dealt a lot in the SharePoint world. And in the SharePoint world, but if you're someone that has a lot of teams or sites, groups that have the word test in them, you probably have the same problem, So you want to control or restrict who can create an Office 365 group. Now, keep in mind, this does utilize a security group. This does require the Azure AD Premium as well in order for this to work. But with that, a group itself is not just a team. It also includes a group in Stream, a team, a Microsoft Planner plan, because keep in mind, a new planner plan, that's hard to say. A new plan does generate an Office 365 group. So that's something here to make mention about as well. What I think is important is if you don't have this set up, coming up with a plan. Do you want to let everyone in the organization create a team? There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're prepared for teams to be created and not used or utilized. Or do you want to have a little bit more governance around it and say, you know what, you have to be on the help desk or the specific desk of, power users or department champions in order to do that. I've seen a lot of success with organizations with users empowering other business users to be those people that can create a team. So instead of having everyone in an organization be able to create a team, isolating it down, maybe it's only 10 or 15 business users, a couple from each department can create a team. You're not forcing them to go to IT, but you're really encouraging them to work with the departments to understand why that team's being created. So here, when we take a look at it for us, we'll see it. This is specifically only done in PowerShell here itself. So I've gone ahead already and I've run a few of these along the way, but I'll zoom in here specifically. So I have an AD group called Allowed to Create Groups. So let me come in here. Here's my AD group called Allowed to Create Groups. Let me go to groups here. You can name it whatever you want. The Allowed to Create Groups was the old school term that Microsoft used to use on their script. So oftentimes you see that in other organizations. But Allowed to Create Groups, it's a security group, cloud only for ourselves. Once that group's created here along the way, then we go ahead and you do have to run this in PowerShell. It does not exist anywhere else. A quick Google or Bing search will easily pull open a script that will do this. But essentially what you're doing is you're just enabling or changing that group creation setting to false. So you're really just setting that to be false in terms of who can create groups. But when you run a get the specific group back, and we take a look at some of our values from our Azure AD settings, you can see here's my prefix that we talked about already. Right? So even though I configured that in the browser, I'm still able to see that here inside of PowerShell. But what's most important here is I've turned off group creation. However, this is now filled in terms of the group creation, what group is allowed to create an Office 365 group. With that being said, you can see it is very friendly and gives you a GUID, right? Think GUID, it's Friday. Now, with that being said, the scripts you find online don't necessarily have the Get Azure AD group added in there, but you can add that in there and notice that the display name then equals the appropriate group name that I'm trying to block. So really from this configuration side of it, what I've done is I've set it up to only allow members or owners of this group to create a team, a plan, a modern SharePoint site attached to a group, or a stream group as well. So keep that in mind, that as you're taking a look at this setting, this does impact quite a few people. But if you wanted to put it in place, you could have it in place and then just toggle that true and false in terms of the group creation on whether it's allowed or not allowed. But again, a quick online search will easily find this. There's no way to do this in the browser yet. Hopefully it comes eventually. But this is a really good way that if you're an organization that has just moved to 365 or is looking at rolling out Teams only for chat and meetings, and you don't need that teamwork piece to kind of explode on you, this is a really good way to manage that component for it. All right. Sorry, it's a little cooking show, but it's a little bit better for my my stress level if I get some of those done ahead of time. All right, so there's the piece. This is one here that we're going to just talk through specifically as a specific item. But when you take a look at creating a group and specifying that portion, you do have the ability to set up guidelines that are out there. So this is a really, thanks, Tim. I need Tim around all the time. I need Tim and Tony. You guys need to follow me along all the time to just go and enter in items in the chat window. So when we take a look here at the group usage guidelines, this is an important one that I think is hidden. Not a lot of people utilize these types of guidelines that are out there. So when you take a look at the idea of, you know, what those items are, whether it's internal guidelines or guest guidelines out there, internal in terms of what users can and cannot do with groups. Maybe, you know, we all do, most of you probably do some sort of IT training, security awareness, IT acceptable use policy, and most of you read that word for word, I am sure. However, when you take a look at those, maybe you have users that just don't understand or may not be 100% on it. You know, I would encourage you to take a look at some of those internal guidelines. If you do have some policies there that are already created, you know, go ahead and take a look at those components. Also, when we take a look at guest guidelines, those are included as part of the email then. So maybe you're using it from a guest access piece of it. And I know I'm a part of guests and teams. I think I'm at about a dozen or two organizations now that I'm a guest in. But when you take a look at those guest guidelines, it's a really important way to ensure that users understand what the purpose maybe is or what's being retained, possibly the privacy, confidentiality, those types of information. So I would encourage you, if you are someone that's using it from a guest component, really explore those guest guidelines as a piece of it. For time's sake, we're not going to dive specifically into these settings themselves, but just wanted to put it on your radar if you're not familiar with them. Internal can be a SharePoint page as long as the user has access to it. Guest guidelines, though, do need to be externally available, whether it's a page on your public website or some other page that you have access to. It is only PowerShell only. Here's the script to be able to do that specifically. So again, from a slide deck perspective, you'll be able to, you know, copy and paste those in there as well. All right, so now we've talked about the idea of creating a team, naming it, who can create the team, what some of those guidelines are and how they're used. And that's great. That's great. However, how do we make sure that all the teams are used, all the groups are used? This is a really, really common scenario here, that when you have Office 365 groups themselves, sometimes they don't get used. What I'm going to say to this here is it's a lot like, I've never fallen down this path here, but because I've never had a treadmill in my basement, but for some of you that have had that treadmill or that exercise equipment that's there, sometimes you just quit using it, right? Focus changes, maybe the name changes, the person who's driving you to do it changes as well. So it's going to happen where you have groups that are not used anymore. And so that's where that expiration information really becomes important. So here, when you take a look at that group expiration, you can have it set to automatically delete groups. Don't worry, it does notify individuals and owners that the group's going to be expiring and be deleted. So the user then has the ability to renew it, or it will continue to be deleted along the path. Now, where I've seen an issue with this before is owners of the group are notified. What if this group is being created and being maintained by all members and there's no longer an owner out there? I'll be completely open and honest. It's very difficult to get an owner out of a team or to have a team without an owner unless the account's purged and deleted. You can't ever delete just the owner out of a team without having another owner there. However, if you delete the account, it will orphan the team to not have an owner. So in this case, the group expiration is a really important item to think about. But if you don't have an owner of a you'll want to think about that as well. So I always encourage organizations to review group ownership on a regular basis, whether it's just a quick output or just a quick browse in the team. Even if you're using it from a team side of it, very few organizations that I know of are using the pure Office 365 group side of it. But even if you have an admin account set as the owner and that email address is monitored on a daily basis, would be a really good way to keep track of that too. There is only one expiration policy per tenant. You can't have more than one, and it can apply to all groups or certain selected groups out there. So let's take a look at where those are at here for us along the way. All right. So I'm back inside of the group area again, and when we take a look at that group area along the way, we have our settings portion on our left-hand side of the screen. Again, how I got here was going to the Azure portal. I'm clicking on groups, and then we were in the naming policy earlier. In this case, though, I can jump into the expiration area for us. Notice in this case, I have the ability to go ahead and set the specific group expiration piece of it. Users do need to have an Exchange mailbox in order to receive an email notification. It's really sad they had to put that in there, but you do have to have, an Exchange items itself. In here then as well, we do also have the ability to set in a specific owner and then the policy itself, whether it's all, none themselves, and you can choose, which groups you want to select as well here. This is a really powerful way to take a look at from a group side of it here itself, to be able to maintain that set of information. And Jake, if there's activity on the channel itself, then that's great questions, both Sean and Jake. We'll jump back to that here in terms of if a team's active itself. Again, we're talking the team side of it. This is more on the group side of it. But when we take a look at the team side of it, we'll see the idea of the active definition and some of those usage pieces of it. So we'll come back to that when we jump into the Teams admin center. Take a look at some of those. Good questions. This is more or less looking at some of those Office 365 groups. Maybe you have a little bit more, you've gone ahead and let people just create some out there. It's still not bad, even if a team is being used, right? Let's think about this for a second. Even if a team is being used and there's activity on the channel itself, is there something wrong with every year it sends that owner a notification that says, do you still need this? I would have a hard time saying no. I think it's important for you to understand in terms of whether or not they're useful itself. So I think it's understood, here from that side of it, that expiration policy is good. Tim, thanks for putting that note in there as well in terms of the recent use. There's debate in terms of what user activity is in recent use there as well, but something to understand there. Perfect. All right. Now we're ready to start over. Let's say we have it successfully set up. We know who's going to be able to create teams. We have that expiration set up. We have the naming convention successful there for us. Enter in a new concept called Teams templates. When we think about the idea of Teams templates, it's a really powerful component and feature that's out there for us. Relatively new for us. It has not been around a long time. Yes, you've had the ability to create a team from an existing team. Could you say that that's a template? Sure, you could. However, somebody could still modify and make changes to that existing team. So it's really not a template, it's really a copy at that point, right? So in this case of it, you do have the ability to create teams templates that are out there. Microsoft has already gone ahead and created some Teams templates for you take a look at. So let's jump in here to demo environments for us. Keep in mind that I am logged in as a global admin here, so I won't see the naming convention in some of those areas out there. Let's hope that it reloads here for us and doesn't take too long. All right. All right, so in this case of it here, down at the bottom portion of it, I can go ahead and click on create done here for us. When I go ahead and create a team, you'll notice options for it. Let me go create team. Why am I not seeing a group there? I may have to jump into a different demo. I wonder if that allowed to create groups is causing me a little bit of a hiccup here. Let me just refresh here real quick and see. I'm only able to create from the group. I love demos here for us. All right, well, let's jump out a little bit here and we'll jump into the admin center instead for us. I guess my change here to this environment this morning does not have me in the group allowed to create teams successfully. So like I said, live demos are always fun, but let's just jump into the admin center here real quick and we'll be able to see it kind of from the back end portion. So come into the Teams admin center here. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can quickly make that change here, but I'm not sure it's going to be completely or as quick as we'd like. All right, so let's take a look at the Teams templates component that's out there. So when we think about the Teams templates that are out there, we're inside of the Teams admin center. Instead of going to the manage Teams portion of it, we can jump down into the Teams templates area. And you'll notice that there's a few different Microsoft options out there for you. There's an Adopt Office 365 team, Manage Project, Onboard, so on and so forth here. I've also gone ahead and created a new template already. I did this morning, tested it all out. Obviously, some delay happened there on the blocking and restricting the groups. So we're not quite seeing it. But in this case of it, I do have the ability to create a new template. So when we think about creating a new template, I have the ability to create a brand new one from scratch if I want to. I can also choose to go ahead and utilize an existing team here as a template. In other words, a team that I have access already to, or I can start with an existing template out there. Let's start with an existing team here that I have access to. So go ahead and click on next. In this case, when we take a look at it, I have obviously a few different teams that are out there. I'm going to choose, let's see here. We'll just choose this RSM Health Clinic as an example. Okay. So you'll notice that there's 6 channels there, no private channels for us to take a look at. I'll go ahead and click next here. Now, as I'm doing this, I have the ability, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. It seems like my screen's chopped off a little bit here, but I have the ability to come and give a quick demo. I'll just say RSM templates. I can give it, additional information, the location that's out there. And then down here, this is where I have the ability to go ahead and add additional channels. I can edit them. I can rename them. I can choose, you know what, this huddles does need to be included by default, so I can edit it, show by default here as well. And I can choose to click apply. Now, in this case of it, you'll notice that you have the ability to more or less manage some of those areas itself. And down at the bottom, then you can choose which apps will automatically be available for users to be able to see. And you'll see obviously a handful of ones created, but I could add in, other apps as well here if I wanted to. So if there's specific apps I needed, I could choose to do that. All right. we'll go ahead and click on submit in this case for us to create that template. Now, I will be honest with you, if this is the first time you do it, it does take a couple of minutes for those templates to get generated out here along the way. But obviously, as you're starting to see that, we have that very easy and quick, simple way to make that happen. Let's take a look at managing teams and creating a team this way for us. Unfortunately, I would do it from the Teams interface, but that's obviously causing me a little bit of a hiccup. So I'm going to jump into the Manage Teams portion like a pure admin would do, and I'll jump in here. Now, in this case of it, you'll notice that I don't have the ability to see and choose the specific template that's out there. Here when we take a look at this side of it, we can choose a specific team name and the privacy, but I don't have the ability to choose a template. The templates at this time are only available in the Teams interface or the Teams client application itself. For you to take a look at. Teams templates is a relatively newer aspect of it. So depending upon your tenant settings, you may not have access to it. Tommy, I appreciate you putting the note in here itself. You can't use Graph API or PowerShell to clone team templates themselves. You can only clone non-templates itself with PowerShell and with the Graph API for it. So just something to make mention that although Teams templates is available for you, they can help out if you want end users to create those teams. But ultimately, when you think about it, may take some additional items here for you to keep track of for it. Cloning is the old way of doing it. Templates is a little bit of a new way to make that happen. I did run on my other screen. I did run that update here to see if we can get group creation set to true here, so that way I can hopefully test it out. But again, specifically from that side of it, I may have screwed something up in my demo environment here along the way. But we'll jump back in here and see if I have the ability to create groups in just a little bit for it. So let me just take a quick peek, see if it's there yet for us. We'll see if this is a little bit faster here. It's still going to create it from the group here. Shoot. All right. But with that, we'll hopefully come back to that a little bit later here in the demo, and we'll have success with that. That's my hope. Otherwise, you've all probably created a team before. The only difference here, one team, it goes and shows you a picker portion of it. I do have screenshots here of what it looks like to take a look at. So, there's where you have the create team. That's what it should look like instead of automatically defaulting to my group. But in this case of it from scratch or from a specific template, again, these are Microsoft specific screenshots from the announcement of the Teams templates themselves. So we went through creating a new team and having that team available for us. But I think the important item to realize here is as you start to see that, you need to balance it out. What is the end user requirements versus the IT side? So if you restrict it only to IT to create teams, IT is going to be creating a lot of teams. If you let end users create teams, you're going to end up with a lot of teams created. So there's a balancing act there in terms of what that act looks like and managing that here successfully. So just something to make mention about as you take a look at it, that balance becomes very, very important. Now, there is the ability here. Microsoft does have a request a team app template that's available here for you. It's a Power App that can get provisioned and deployed in your environment. I think when you think about that side of it, it's really important for you to understand, is this something you need to do or not? Do you see a lot of teams being created after that initial deployment out there? If the answer is, well, I'm not quite sure yet, maybe it's not worth investing your time and effort here on this requesting a team. But if you're help desk, if you're overwhelmed and bogged down with the number of teams you have to create, you probably want to come up with some sort of provisioning process. Whether it's a PowerShell script that gets run, whether it's a flow that calls and clones a specific team, or even you can have a flow create a team now Assign an owner and a member. Yes, it's not going to be a template, but it's going to be named what you want it to be named. And it's going to be displayed and given user access there as well. So even in a matter of, gosh, 10, 15 minutes, you could build a SharePoint list that was your intake, and then use Automate to go ahead and create the team and maybe a simple approval process. So keep that in mind, that depending upon what your level of effort is, I'd recommend and see that. Oh, I knew that was going to come up. I'm not a GCC expert for it. I just finished up a project with a client in GCC High. And I'll just say that the answer was no there. From a provisioning tool instead of GCC, I may have to rely on you guys, the community, if anyone else is a GCC user or expert out there, if there's any provisioning tools that are available there itself. Otherwise, I'll have to just take a look at this after the session, and Annette, I can find this chat message or mention you in it so you have the ability to see it. Happy to do a little research on that. I'm not sure off the top of my mind. It's, as I mentioned with licensing, that's difficult to keep track of, and the different tenants are also difficult to keep track of on what's available in each tenant level. All right. Now that we've spent about half the time here taking a look at the team creation process itself, we're going to take a look at some of those policies. Now, with the policies, we're going to go through this a little bit faster and quicker for you. Not necessarily as many items, to take a look at itself. Some of these you probably have already configured. Some of these are ones where you're like, why would I turn off memes and GIFs? I really like those as an example. There is one piece that I want to take a look at, though. So we're going to stay on the slideshow here for a few minutes, and then we'll jump in the rest of the demo here during the workshop timeframe. Will be in the browser. So you'll have some specific hands-on look and feel here in just a moment. The first thing to make mention is Teams policies do apply to a lot of different areas. They apply to Teams in general, whether or not users can create private channels. They apply to the meeting side of it, who can share their screen, who can take control. Is there a meeting lobby out there? I would be interested, from when we get to some of these policies themselves, if any of you have, less on deploying these policies, or more or less how you got the business to buy in with some of your policy changes, I'd be interested to hear what you have and what you've learned through the process. Live events. Live events is a nice one. If you're not aware, live events is a webinar style meeting that's available for you. We're seeing a lot of organizations start to take effect and use live events as part of the Dynamics marketing add-on. So if you're an organization that uses Dynamics CE or customer engagement, sales, whatever it's called these days, CRM, and you use the marketing module with inside of there, you actually have the ability to auto provision meetings and or live events that are there. So we're seeing a lot of organizations needing to adapt from the in-person events to the online events, and whether those are meetings or live events here to take a look at. Messaging, in terms of what users are able to send messages to. App permission, what apps can be added into Teams or what apps should be restricted. And then the app setup portion of it. What should be pinned on that rail on the left-hand side of the screen, and for who? If you're in a larger organization, you probably have different focus areas and different departments. And so that's a really powerful way to ensure and keep those specific. So there are a couple ways, I think it's important for you to think about. You can assign different policies to different people. Just like you can assign group policy on a traditional infrastructure component. Multiple ways, whether it's department or role focused, maybe it's user specific. I know that I have to do some user specific ones. If you're dealing with a smaller organization, you have the user component of it as well. We also have the ability here to set up by department, right? Maybe HR and marketing have different policies that are needed for live events in terms of what users need to have access to. So you do have the ability to get very granular and different and flexible when it comes to those policies. My recommendation, though, is to come up with an organizational-wide policy and then grant exceptions to those policies. Policies themselves, org-wide, are defaults. You can edit the default policy themselves, and you can create additional custom policies like I just mentioned. One of the pieces to make mention is once you have those policies created, it's a per user or per group basis. They added the group assignment in. I'm not sure if that's in the GCC yet, but at least from my demo area, we'll be able to see that here coming. You can also utilize PowerShell to assign them. If you are someone that creates a lot of different policies and needs to manage them, I would encourage you to look and evaluate the PowerShell component of it. It's really, I would say, pretty easy to learn and keep track of. But with that piece of it, the portal works, but it may not be the most efficient way. We're going to use the portal today just because it's a little bit easier to understand and see where all those settings are located. All right, here's our first fork in the road. When we take a look at creating a policy, you can use the Teams interface, Admin Center, which we're going to do, but then you can also use PowerShell. Enter in Skype for Business PowerShell. Welcome to the party. If you're not someone that's done Skype for Business online PowerShell in the past, get ready. It's a really good time. One of these days, I really hope that we don't have to use this anymore. I hope that we can use Teams in general. But for those of you that are managing Teams today, the Skype for Business online PowerShell is still needed and still important. However, there is a Teams module that's coming out, and it's starting to get things in there. So I have to use both still at this time. All right, we're going to skip through some of those pieces of it. I'm going to specifically start to one area inside of the meeting side of it here themselves. And then we're going to jump into the demo. When we think about the idea of policies for users, we can assign them from a meetings side of it. We can assign it depending upon the user role, whether they're an organizer or a participant. We can do a per organizer policy. Keep in mind, all meeting participants then inherit from the organizer. We also have a per user policy, so specifically a user, but keep in mind that it combines those efforts together. Here is the one component that I want to make mention to. So you'll notice myself is up there. If my policy allows me to do cloud recording and allow me to use video, colleague of mine, Ben, is set to false for recording and false for video. We don't want to see Ben and we don't want him to click the record button. And then another colleague of mine, Hassan, we want him to be able to record, but we don't want him to be able to share his video. Okay. This is like those tricky math problems. If you're like me and you're having to help out your kids for school these days at home, this is like one of those in-depth math problems where you have to solve them for us to take a look at. So here's the important. If Pat organizes a meeting, Pat and Hassan can record in the meeting, but not Ben, right? Because obviously I organized it, so I should be allowed to record it. If Ben organizes a meeting, no one can record the meeting because his is set as false. If Hassan organizes a meeting, no one can share their video because remember, his is set as false. If Pat organizes the meeting, then only Pat can share his video. So that's an important piece to make mention. So let's take a look at where those are located here. All right. So for us to take a look and start to see that information, those are all within inside of the Teams app with some of the different policies that are there. I'll zoom in a little bit more here for us. The first item in policies here to take a look at is the concept of Teams policies. Teams policies are not that exciting. It's whether or not you can utilize a org-wide channel or not, or private channel rather, for it. A private channel in this case, remember, does create a separate SharePoint site for you to take a look at. So that's an important element here to understand, whether or not you want users to be able to create private channels. Keep in mind, once I've created a new, I'll just create a new one here. We'll call this MN365 as a quick demo. We'll say that, you know what, users can't create private channels in this case. Now that I've created that here, I do have the ability to edit it and bring it back, or I can assign the users. So I can choose to manage the users here for us. So I can say, you know, Jeff, for instance, is assigned this specific item, or we'll just take, there we go, there's Jeff. We'll add Jeff in here. So again, that's manually doing it one user at a time. If you had a lot of users, that wouldn't be really efficient to do. You have the group policy assignment here as well. So when you think about the group policy assignment here, I can go ahead and choose a group out there for us. I'm going to just pick that allowed to create groups component that's out there. I can choose what rank it's in, and keep in mind the order is what order the users will take effect into. And I can choose to assign a specific policy to that group of users. So that can be a really efficient way to manage your specific policies with that group policy assignment. That is relatively new. Not sure where that's at in the deployment side of it for it. I know that newer tenants, it's showing up at least on the commercial side. Haven't had a tenant where that's not available yet for the group policy component, but it can be a really efficient way to assign it to groups of users as well. Encourage you to utilize either dynamic Active Directory groups or those on-prem AD groups that are synced up from a management side of it. All right. There is a newer one in here as well. This one is a little bit, I didn't hit my deck because this deck's been created for a while here, but when we think about the idea of our policies, this is in terms of what users should get the preview features of Teams. So there's been obviously some new settings coming out, whether it's large gallery, together mode, and as Teams builds and has new policies out there, the preview features really become important on whether users should see them or not see them. So maybe you want to open it up to your department champions or your user group that's inside your organization. This is a good option here for you to take a look at and deploy some of those. So that's the update policies in terms of whether the pre-release or preview features that are available with inside of Teams. We're going to jump down here to the meetings portions of it itself, and we're going to just jump into the meetings policies here to take a look at. So you can see this is a few different items here. If we take a look at that global org-wide defaults for us, these are the items that are available underneath the general audio and video portion that's out there. The general portion of it, whether or not users can choose to meet in channels or the Outlook add-ons added in, pretty self-explanatory for all of those. Audio and video, again, these are specific individual users themselves, so that's an important item to realize. Down below here then as well, down is the content sharing. So this is where I see a lot of organizations make some adjustments here in terms of the content sharing. Whether or not you want to allow the entire screen to be shared or a single application, or it's disabled. Maybe you want to have it so some users just can't share their screen. Or maybe there's, you know, users, you're in a financial industry and you want to make sure that they don't share something they shouldn't share. Then maybe it's a specific single application. Keep in mind when you choose to click share your screen, at the bottom of your screen, you have the option of specific screens, the applications, and then you also have PowerPoint available as well for you to take a look. The PowerPoint sharing, this is one that I get a lot of questions on, and honestly, it probably causes some confusion if users don't fully understand. It's probably difficult for me to demo this. I don't think I can, but if you've ever shared a PowerPoint, not how I'm sharing it by sharing my screen, or the application, right? Not those two, but if you come in and you say share a PowerPoint, maybe it's stored in your OneDrive or a Team, for instance, that will allow a user to advance through the deck. So I had I know of an organization that had PowerPoint sharing enabled. Their CEO went and shared a deck of 5 slides long, so nothing too crazy. But what ended up happening is people were advancing the slides before they got to it, and then that meeting chat quickly turned in, and people were jumping ahead of the meeting. So it's no different than if you use kind of that animation in PowerPoint to bring bullets in one by one. That PowerPoint sharing may not be the most efficient way of doing it either. Whiteboard, the shared notes aspect of it is there. And then participants and guests on whether or not they want to make some changes. So this is an important piece, I think, really to understand is this is where you're starting to see these settings change quite a bit. Whether or not anonymous people can start a meeting. These are not the defaults, by the way. We've fine-tuned this a little bit. But if users can override, if you can meet in a private meeting, for instance, live captions, just like what was mentioned, Tim mentioned at the beginning. And then the last piece is if you want chat enabled or not enabled. When you go to schedule a new meeting here real quickly, I'm going to create a new meeting, and I'm going to show you what I'm referring to here. When you go to schedule a new meeting and you add in the Teams meeting for us, maximize that on the screen. Down at the bottom of the screen, as the organizer of it, you have the ability to jump into what's called meeting options down below here. You can do this anytime up until the meeting starts out there. We'll go ahead and we'll open this up. This is probably going to open up on another window. Nope, there we go. So these are meeting options for that meeting. I have not scheduled this here. Notice in this case, I have the ability to choose who bypasses the lobby. So on a meeting by meeting basis, I can actually tweak some of those policies that are out there. Maybe I'm doing a really confidential HR meeting. I'm doing an interview, interviews, throughout the day. A common scenario, maybe it's a recurring event and you don't want people to just be able to come in when it's not their time. That's a really important piece to look at. What is this really setting it up for? Private rooms, right? Personal meeting rooms. If you've come from other meeting software, you're familiar with the idea of having a personal meeting room where that link doesn't really expire. So in this case of it, the link would, the meeting itself would expire, but you do have the ability to control that. When people come and join, whether or not you want that to be announced or not, who can present? Maybe it's a meeting like this and you don't want someone else to think they can present. You can go and make changes. And then the one that I like is whether or not people can unmute themselves. I think it's important if you want that dialogue, but if you're using a meeting and you don't want people to be able to unmute, a really powerful way to make that happen as well to that. All right. So I don't know if you've clicked on that or seen that. I know that when I look at rolling out Teams to a lot of organizations, users do not know that that link exists because they just don't look for it. And so that's an important piece to make mention of. All right, let's come back into the policies themselves. Continuing on down here, we do have some live events policies in terms of who can schedule them and whether or not they're recorded or if you're going to use a third party option there for it. But keep in mind, we have the scheduling portion that's out there also from a scheduling and the recording piece. I think it's important to note with live events, we're probably going to see a lot more organizations start to adapt and utilize these live events. One is because they're they're clean looking. It loads them all in the browser. The other piece is it allows for that town hall like meeting. So a lot of organizations around the beginning of the calendar year will do a town hall like meeting or an update where everyone would have gathered into a conference room or into a large meeting room and done a broadcast. This is a really efficient way to make that happen as well. All right, to my favorite section, the messaging policies. All right. When we take a look at the messaging policies, again, you do have the ability to manage those on individual or group basis, but this is messaging is I'll step back here for a second. I wish we had separate messaging policies for chat versus channel messages. And the reason for that is in terms of, there's some confusion that shows up here in terms of can somebody delete a message or what that looks like if an owner can delete a message. When you think about the private chat side of it itself, users have the ability to maintain that if they can delete those messages. An owner is referring to the team or the channel conversation here. I think back to email. And if you're hoping to have Teams adopt and take off more than email, I would really sit and think hard about whether or not you'd not allow somebody to delete or edit a message. You know, I think about the number of times that I've received a email in mistake, and then the user goes ahead and utilizes the recall function. Now, that recall function normally means A, they weren't done with it, or B, the user shouldn't have seen it. Whenever I get that recall message, what do I normally do as a human being? My curiosity peaks up, and I want to go take a look at what are they trying to recall. So in this case, it's a really powerful way to control that and still have those powers available to them. Some organizations like to turn off the read receipts, whether or not there's that little eyeball that shows up. It is user controlled. If you are not aware of that, you can turn that off. You recommend, you know, depending upon who's sending you messages, may be powerful to turn that off as well. But keep in mind, it's a good way just to get a quick moment to say, hey, they have seen it. They just haven't responded to it yet. Whether or not chat's available, maybe you're not rolling out chat yet. If you want to use GIFs or GIFs, depending upon what your flavor is, that's what I could have called the session. Is it GIF or GIF? But whether or not those are available inside of a specific conversation or specific channel portion, as well as memes and stickers. Just out of curiosity, has anyone turned off the ability to use GIFs, GIFs, or stickers and memes in their conversations, and why? Anyone turn that off? Anyone brave enough to mention why they turned it off? Either nobody's turned it off or no one's brave enough to tell us why they turned it off. With that here, you know, I think it's important for you to really think about what is the purpose and what is that going to do. I have seen memes and stickers help adoption of the platform. I've also seen them become distractions, right? So I think that you need to evaluate what that looks like and whether or not they're available. I'll be honest, if they're available now, you're going to have a mutiny on your hands if you go to turn them off because there's a user or two that really enjoy to use them out there. I know I probably overuse them more than some of my colleagues, but I find it a very fun way to communicate and react to a specific conversation. Here you also have the ability whether or not urgent messages are there, users can remove from group chats, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different settings here that's available with inside of the Teams messaging component. The next item we're going to take a look at is the app portion itself. So the app permission policies, this is a really effective way. Maybe you want to have, you know, the defaults. Everyone that gets Teams has the ability to add any Microsoft app out there or its partners. So keep in mind that doesn't just include Microsoft apps. You also then have the third-party apps that are available. In other words, what list of apps will users be able to see? And then the last piece out there is whether or not you can sideload or add in those zipped files as apps. So I think that that's a really efficient way to maintain that specific item there with the policy portion as well. If you're not familiar with the app piece of it itself, let me just come out here. In the lower left-hand corner, when I click on the apps portion, again, this is looking at me specifically from a team side of it, but there's a lot of different apps out here. But also when I take a look at the teams and individual channels, I'd have the apps there as well. Just out of curiosity, let's see if I can create a team here. And it still wants to do it from a group. Shoot. Let me just do a hard refresh of that screen here real quickly. Let's see if we can get in there. All right. The last thing I wanted to touch on here specifically was the voice component out there itself. When we take a look at the voice component itself, I think it's really important for you to understand that if you're not someone that's deployed voice before, you want to really evaluate and understand what that area looks like. You can have different policies for emergency, for instance. So when somebody calls 911, who does it alert? Does it dial in or conference in other users? You also have the ability to use call queues and auto attendance. If using Teams voice is something that you are really, really interested in, I would encourage you to gather requirements first. I have seen organizations go full down the path of using Microsoft Teams, and they say, all right, we're going to use it for voice. They're in the middle of a deployment and they say, we need help because we can't do X, Y, and Z in Teams. So keep in mind that as you're taking a look at that, if you really, truly want to look at deploying Microsoft Teams voice, I encourage you to gather all of your initial requirements already at the beginning. Now, if you are someone that has a very simple phone system, there's a receptionist, they can dial in someone, whatever the case may be. You have the ability to do that very simply. But if you have an in-depth call center or want in-depth reporting on those calls, not call quality in the aspect of technical, but call quality in the aspect on how long was the person on hold, how many times did it ring, those metrics don't exist yet. So something to make mention off of there. But you do have the ability to do, different policies themselves. So for instance, when somebody calls 911, you can have it specify and route appropriately out there. So in this case of it, when someone calls from home, when somebody calls 911, there's the different items there. From a testing aspect of it, who notifies when somebody calls an emergency number, all different examples there to take a look at and start to see. So again, there's a lot there. What we wanted to do today was really just go through the policy aspect of it itself and give you a little bit of understanding of the policies. The one piece we didn't get to itself is some of the usage and analytics behind the scenes. Keep in mind when you take a look at some of those aspects of it, there's a lot there, but I would encourage you to take a look at that adoption Power BI pack that's out there in terms of some of the different usage analytics that are available there for it. But with that, I do want to wrap up to let you have a break to go get more coffee or step up and stretch a little bit here before you jump into the next session specifically. So with that, I'll pause if there's any questions. Otherwise, thank you for your time today. And we'll look forward to seeing you maybe in a session themselves. I will do a digging on that GCC high question though, or GCC question rather, that was mentioned. So with that, are there any questions on concepts or items we went through here today?
And real quick, Pat, we are doing a $25 session gift card giveaway, so you might want to hang on for that as well.
Yep. Yeah, don't forget about that. And now you'll just see people, Tim, bounce from meeting to meeting to hopefully get the very end, right?
Right.
All right.
Well, so what I've done to, if there's no questions, guys, what I've done to pick a winner here is everybody that's participated in the conversation, I've put into a random picker here. So I'm going to go ahead and run my generation to see if you are unable to receive gifts through policy or something and you end up being the winner, let me know, preferably right away. But the random picker is Nathan Obenhofer. And if you're on, I believe I have Nathan's contact info. So I've worked with him before, so I'll be able to get a hold of Nathan. But thank you guys. Any other questions or anything?
I do have a question. This is Jolynn. I'm with TransUnion. And we just recently deployed Teams in our environment, over 9,000 seats. And one of the things that we've been struggling with is when we're onboarding new employees, what have people been doing to manage that policy assignment when these new employees come in? We are using security groups, and that's how they're enabled for Teams. I know we have looked at the group policy assignments, but that doesn't cover all the policies. So what have other people been doing?
I'll take a stab first, and then I do want to hear from the rest of the group. What we've been doing for other clients that are in similar boat of that is, as part of the onboarding process, we have a series of PowerShell scripts that are assigned to the users based upon their role and what policy they get. So that's how we're managing it. Prior to that group policy assignment that was there, but understanding that some policies don't that are not applied. Obviously, the more that you can rely heavily on the global org-wide policies, the easier it is. But specifically, I think that's one approach is to have an onboarding script that assigns the policies appropriately based upon the user.
Okay, and that's what we're ultimately doing. I just didn't know if there was a better way.
I'm not aware of a better way, at least at this time, that I've come across. But yeah, it's a common problem, and obviously, as you have more employees come on, it's difficult. I really wish, you know, create our own policy packages, templates themselves, and then obviously assign them appropriately based upon there.
Okay.
Thanks, Josh. It looks like Josh posted in the chat that there's some third party as well. I'm not familiar with those intimately, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Josh, for putting that in. All right. Thanks, Tim, again. It looks like Nathan heard his name, so we're good to go there.
Perfect. All right. Well, it looks like we got a little bit of time here. I hope you guys are joining either the 10:30 session here or feel free to switch tracks. Obviously, there's a lot of good content today. So I think with that, we will wrap up for a bit here and start 10:30.